Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 97th day of the Russian invasion and 9th year of the Russian-Ukrainian war. I'm Andriy Shevchenko. On behalf of Mediacentrу Ukraine team, I'd like to welcome all the journalists covering our battle for freedom. We start this special event, which will serve as a way to recap the first 3 months of the Russian full-scale invasion into Ukraine. In a minute, we'll see the large-scale social survey of Lviv region, which will indicate the outlook and the opinions of the Lviv residents and IDPs. We start by giving the floor to Maksym Kozytskyy, the military governor of Lviv region. Glory to Ukraine. I'd like to thank all the people for joining us today. It's been 100 days that we've been fighting this hot war. We've been talking a lot about things that are needed, the way we are holding our defenses, the way we are bringing in humanitarian relief, but many of us haven't had the time to notice the people in the Lviv region and the way they feel. We are all working to keep them safe and giving a means to continue life. I'd like to thank Oleksii Antypovych for this study. The rating sociological group conducted to indicate some insights into the Lviv residents and Lviv IDPs, the 100 days of war, the feelings, the sentiments, the outlook, and the assistance given to the IDPs, the assistance given to the front, and the way we've lived those 100 days of war. Oleksii, the floor is yours. Thank you. To begin with, I'd like to say that the sociological group rating has conducted 12 national surveys to measure the opinions and moods in Ukraine. We've shown our results, and many of you could have come across them in the news. But as for the regional focus, we haven't had the opportunity to measure that. And as I talked to Maksym Kozytskyy, he posed some questions that I wasn't prepared to answer as the social studies expert, and I felt we needed to gauge that and measure the sentiments of the Lviv region and IDPs. The way the IDPs feel about their stay in Lviv, the way they're treated by the locals. This is a local study, and we studied the city of Lviv and the region beyond. We surveyed 1,200 residents of Lviv and key cities and 800 IDPs staying in Lviv region. The study was complete on the 23rd of May, and we are trying to present the findings efficiently. So let me start my presentation. Let me come out with some key takeaways. So, Lviv is as united as the rest of Ukraine is. The war forged us together, and we all stand shoulder to shoulder as we battle for our common victory. And there's no difference between the Lviv residents and Lviv region residents, but the best discovery was that the opinions of the IDPs and locals concurred when it applied to the national issues. Some differences have been seen in the way the IDPs and the locals see their mutual relations, but overall they are very positive, I would conclude. Let me start uh, with the opinions of Lviv residents and Lviv staying in Lviv temporarily, what they feel when they think of Ukraine. The top answer is hope, and it received the highest rating. So we hope for the better. We aspire to win this war. No one is surrendering. And here there's no difference of opinion between the locals and the IDPs. We've also asked the people how they feel about the armed forces of Ukraine, and we see 100 support for the Ukrainian armed forces. Then the president for the President Zelensky, and it's 93% of residents of Lviv region are supportive of the presidents, and the same uh, support level is seen amongst the IDPs. Then we've asked the support for the mayor of Lviv, Andriy Sudovy, and it is 65%, and then support for the military governor uh, of Maksym Kozytskyy, and that's roughly 60%. So the level of support for the government is overwhelming, I would say. Overall, the satisfaction with the different areas of social life is still very high, and that is about the supply of medication. Um, it's acceptable for 9 residents out of 10, and it's about pricing but not the availability. As for the law and order, supply of food and defenses of the city, all that has been assessed in the most positive light by the people. What are the fears and concerns for the locals and the IDPs? And the number one threat is a missile strike on the military and civilian targets. The next fear is sabotage operations. People have least fear of being captured, perhaps due to the geography of Lviv region, which is remotest from the current area of hostilities and closest to the western border. This slide indicates that the vast majority of people is contributing in the war effort. Some are paying funds, some are helping out as volunteers, some are volunteering with the territorial defense or the armed forces of Ukraine. Just 16% find themselves not in a position to contribute to victory, and those are mostly women and the elderly for clear reasons. These people don't have the opportunity financially or time-wise to help the war effort. Now, the demographical structure of the internally displaced people is in line uh, with the following. 60% of the IDPs we have surveyed come from the eastern regions of Ukraine, 20% come from the center, 20 from the south, and very few have arrived from west. Чернівці, Ivano-Frankivsk, Zakarpattia, 46 of them speak Russian at home. And that is important question that we will address more. A third talk both languages, and every fifth of them talks Ukrainian at home. So we have mostly received the Russian-speaking Ukrainians. The age structure is diverse. The mean age of the IDP is 43. So this is an active age. It's not just the elderly or the children. The overwhelming number of IDPs are women, and 38% are men of those staying in Lviv, and 45% of IDPs have children aged 0 to 17, and this is the age breakdown for the children. Now, why did the IDPs choose to come to Lviv? We tried to look into this question, but because there are 18% who provided the answers others. So there are a mix of reasons why people chose to come here. Some came to Lviv because there was a train going to Lviv and didn't choose to come to Lviv as a rational subject decision. They took the train that was heading west, so they arrived in Lviv. But 40% have stated that they've come to Lviv because they have friends and family in here, and that is a good thing. That means people are connecting with their loved ones. Many people arrived in Lviv because they knew there were vacancies, and 16% arrived because there were organizations taking them in and helping them to settle here. Now, the treatment of the IDPs, this was the intent of the study, as we wanted to measure objective indicators, and the social opinions are just as important. So what do we see? Firstly, the IDPs, 80% of them have a very positive perception of the way they are treated by the locals, and that is a very assuring indicator. 14 more are saying they are treated neutrally, and just 1 or 2% are saying they are not treated well. But the locals are reserved in the way they assess attitude towards the IDPs. 50% of locals are saying it's positive, and a third, quite a large proportion of the locals in Lviv say their attitude is neutral. So it's more reserved compared to the IDPs. And every 10th resident of Lviv is saying that they feel negatively about the IDPs. 3% have a very negative treatment. I'd say that overall this is very positive, because there is some um, coverage of the tension germinating between the locals and the IDPs, but it's not critical. To continue the topic of the way the IDPs are treated, we asked the locals whether they would be prepared to put up the IDPs. And this is during the third month of war, when the influx of the IDPs have already been put up. So a quarter are saying they have already put up the IDPs in their homes. 15% more are prepared to do so. So we still have some people in reserve who stand ready to help those who have to flee to Lviv, and 50% say they're not prepared. A certain social and psychological issue is whether you would like to make friends amongst the locals. This is what we ask the IDPs, and the 90+% of answers are willing to make friends in Lviv. And the same trend is seen amongst the local. We've asked the locals, would you like to make some new friends and make new connections amongst the IDPs? The locals are more reserved, but well, you ask yourself, would you like to make new friends and acquaintances? Some would say no, as they have a lot of friends and they have a wide circle, and it might be enough for them. So here, a third of people are not looking forward to making new friends amongst the IDPs, but again, some of them are not willing to expand their social circle. The difference between Lviv city and region is there. Lviv is more saturated with communication and opinions of IDPs compared to the regions. The locals in the region are more prepared to make friends with people from elsewhere. So the region is more open to communication compared to the residents of Lviv. And now, let's start the block of the language. The language the IDPs talk to the locals. 67% say that they use Ukrainian to communicate in Lviv with Lviv locals. At that, 46% of them choose to use Russian at home, so almost a half of them. An interesting indicator is seen here. There's 57% of the Russian-speaking people who choose to speak Ukrainians to the locals in Lviv. That's 60% of those who speak Ukrainian it can be a transition to the Ukrainian language or Ukrainization that we've recorded in the national surveys, where a third of the Russian-speaking people in Ukraine are planning to transition and choose to speak Ukrainian language because of the Russian aggression. People perceive everything Russian, as toxic, and many Russian-speaking people of Ukraine are prepared and are declaring their intent to switch to Ukrainian instead. Another question. Do you think there's a language conflict between the locals and the IDPs? 46% of IDPs don't perceive the problem of language difference, and 30% of the locals feel that this problem isn't there. But the locals of Lviv, a quarter of them say yes, there is a language issue and it is important and it is major, and 42% say that the language issue is there but it's not major. The language issue is raised by the younger generation, which I personally found surprising. I thought it would be the elderly that would perceive the language as an issue, but it is the younger generation. And that pertains to the IDPs. So the young people who've arrived in Lviv must be more prepared to speak Russian and don't see a problem about that. The overall assessment of the tension between the locals and the IDPs. The picture is this is the only discrepancy. If most IDPs feel that there's no tension between themselves and locals, whilst 52% of the locals feel that there is a certain tension in place. Even though if we talk of the tension, it's more felt in Lviv because the population here is much denser, because people are cramped in here compared to the region. In smaller cities, when it's more relaxed, there's lesser traffic on the street, there are fewer people, maybe fewer social contacts amongst the people. So this is a slide indicating that the locals in Lviv and region show the same level of tension, but the IDPs who've traveled to smaller towns feel the tension to a lesser degree. So it must be in the air in Lviv city, but less so in the region. Do you know any facts of violation of social norms and acceptable behavior on the part of the IDPs? So 27%, a quarter of the surveyed residents of Lviv, are saying that they have experienced such facts firsthand. Some others have read it in the mass media, and 40% haven't heard of such facts. There is a difference between Lviv and smaller towns. It is more marked in Lviv, yet every fourth resident of Lviv is saying that they have faced some inappropriate behavior. Let's ask what is inappropriate behavior. For some, speaking Russian would constitute inappropriate behavior. For some, it would be drinking alcohol in public places. So that could include a range of behaviors. We can keep researching it, but overall, to say there is an overwhelming problem, that would not be the case. So only every 10th resident of Lviv region has a negative opinion of the IDPs, and the reason could be that every fourth resident had experienced such inappropriate behavior firsthand. Now, the accommodation for the IDPs. First question was generic. How comfortable is your place of stay? And the locals and the IDPs are saying that over 90% of them are staying in comfort. We've asked the IDPs, what are you lacking? And they are lacking medication. A fourth of IDPs are saying they're experiencing a lack of medication. Every fifth is experiencing a shortage of consumer goods. But if you are in a refugee center and you don't have a TV set or a washing machine, then perhaps you are short of those consumer goods. As for medications, all Ukrainians are short of medications, especially because their prices on medication are prohibitive. Have you received social or humanitarian relief? We've asked the IDPs. Almost 70% of IDPs have received help from the volunteers, from the people. Over 50% have received relief from the government, and another 50% received relief from the charitable organization. When we asked the residents of Lviv region, have you given such help to the IDPs? We've seen the same 70% saying yes. So that is a correspondence between given and received. How effective is the local government coping with the accommodation of the refugees from the refugee? The overwhelming answer, 80% are saying yes, the government is effectively coping with receiving the IDPs, and that is reassuring to hear. The IDPs that we have talked to have told us that half of them are staying in refugee centers. So we mean that a refugee center includes the dormitories, hotels, some other facilities that have been given to them. We've asked whether the prices on these are exorbitant, accessible, or low. Every fifth IDP is renting a place, and 54% of them are saying that the price is too high for them. Well, this is a fact. This is a fact for the landlords in Lviv. The question about the education for children, and I would like to thank Maksym that we should inquire about that. We are seeing an issue that will need to be addressed by the government or the IDPs. So 70% of the refugees who have children have told us that their children go to school that they used to attend, because we are now schooling children remotely, and children fire up their computer and study with their school, be that in Kharkiv or Kyiv. 10% of children have assimilated and joined the local Lviv schools. And that is a good indicator, but on the other hand, it confirms the number of people who intend to stay on here for a longer term, and that is every 10th. And I'll say more about that. The problem is about the 18% of children that are not studying anywhere, and that's not a good thing. But also, we should ask the IDPs. This was a survey conducted in May, and the school year isn't over yet. It would be good if people could organize the tuition for their children, either with the school that they are enrolled in or the local school in Lviv. The desire to stay on and work in the city. A quarter of the IDPs staying in Lviv would like to stay on in Lviv. This is a statement they made, but that's still quite a lot. If we consider 240 plus thousand IDPs officially registered in Lviv, and there are those who haven't registered officially, just calculate the number of those willing to stay. It's not a fact that all of them would stay. It will surely depend on the situation with war, but 40% are definitely going back home. And another interesting development, another interesting finding of the study is that 40% of the residents would see the positive prospects of IDP staying on and working in Lviv. 36 take a neutral stance, and just the remainder wouldn't like the IDPs to stay on. So we can see the different indicators showing 10 to a quarter different social psychological estimates fact-based, objective estimates about a negative treatment of the internally displaced people. Now, which IDPs would like to stay on in Lviv? Those who are staying in Lviv. Lviv is a wonderful city, which is a draw for many, and this is why people want to stay on Lviv compared to Drohobych or Chervonograd. Still, Lviv is a wonderful city, and more men would like to stay, and compared to fewer than half the women who would like to stay on. Women are homemakers, so they want to go back to their homes. We asked the residents of Lviv how they felt about building permanent shelters for IDPs. Two-thirds, 60%, take a positive view on that, and a quarter has a negative attitude. As for the relocation of the companies from the east of Ukraine to Lviv region, 84% of Lviv residents or Lviv locals see that as a positive development because that means bringing in new jobs. And again, switching to IDPs, are you planning to go back home? 18% are saying yes in the shortest perspective. And let's look at the breakdown. These are residents of central Ukraine, where it's relatively safe these days, comparatively safe compared to the east and south of Ukraine. Yes, I'm going back, but I will wait out a while. That's a third of the respondents, and 36% are saying yes, but only when the war is over. And this answer was mostly provided by the residents of the east and south regions where the hostilities are fiercest now. And that is a perfectly objective answer. What else can we expect from the people who fled the hostilities? And just 8% are saying that they are not going back home. This is a cautious estimate that about 10% of the IDPs would like to stay on in their new homes in Lviv and are definitely not going back home. They may have lost their homes. They may have been so traumatized or brutalized by the war and the hostilities and the Russian aggression that they're afraid of going back home. They're afraid to go back to their homes. Or the other opinion could be that they loved it in Lviv and they want to start a new life in here. Now, we asked the IDP, are you employed? So every fifth, 20% of the IDPs are holding down jobs. This is a good indicator, if you ask me, given that these are internally displaced people. But a better indicator is that 40% of those who don't hold down a job would like to find a job in Lviv. The question, how will they land a job? But they are willing to find a job. And that's most prevalent amongst the people from the east and the south that will have to bid some time before they can go back home, as they have said so in the previous two responses. Quite as many of them are men. So those are willing to find a job in Lviv are mostly men. And the IDPs staying in Lviv are more determined to find employment because everything comes at a price and people need to find the money to pay for it. Now, going back to the national level, are you prepared to sustain some financial hardships in order to defeat Russia? The overwhelming majority of local IDPs are prepared to bear out until we win the war. 10% more or every 10th is saying yes, but not for long. And that is quite fair if they don't have the reserves to last out. But this is the most positive response. Are you considering the option of going abroad should the military situation aggravate in Lviv? 20% of the residents of Lviv are saying yes, they're considering this option, and 40% of the IDPs are considering the option. Let me elaborate. 60% of the IDPs are women, and women naturally give this estimate of the readiness to relocate because of the approaching hostilities. Again, this is perfectly objective that Lviv residents are less prepared to go abroad, so this would probably even out. And lastly, the difference between Lviv and towns of Lviv region is that in towns, people have greater fear and more prepared to go abroad. The Lviv residents are lesser so. Without further ado, I wanted to go over the presentation, and I'm prepared to field all the questions, but perhaps I'd give the floor to Maksym Kozytskyy for his comment. Oleksii, thank you so much for this study. What strikes me is that both the Lviv residents and IDP are united in their support of the Ukrainian army and of the president. We see that the people are patriotic and are prepared to bear the brunt of the war until we win. 90% of the residents of Lviv region treat the IDPs well. These are people who've come to us in times of grief. And locals and IDPs get along well and are ready to rebuild their homeland together. And 50% of people are prepared to look for a job and help to sustain the national war effort. The downside is that 18% of the children amongst the IDPs are not schooling these days, are not following their tuition remotely. And this is a factor that needs to be addressed as our future lies in the hands of the educated new generation. And we need to rectify the situation as soon as we can, and it is for the administration and for the administration, education departments, for the remote schooling department. We need to make sure the children can follow their studies, whether with the local or their home school. These opportunities have to be created. We'll talk to the refugee hubs and keep it under control to make sure the children are properly schooled. I would like to thank everyone that we are a united nation of a great home, and people have stretched out a hand in help to each other in these dire times. Glory to Ukraine, glory to our heroes. Marta Байдаг, твоє місто. The question from our viewers about the housing for the military in Lviv. Is the region developing a program to offer housing to the servicemen, and who would be given this in the order of priority? We are not developing a program to provide housing for the servicemen, but the program is developed at the national level about housing being offered to the servicemen fighting in the east. And one more question, if I may. It pertains to the situation with the territorial defense. Women asked you to uh, bring the men back from the front line, from the zero and the first position, as they called, as they're not armed as they should be. And I would not make the distinction between the territorial defense and the Ministry of Defense, because territorial defense is part of the Ukrainian armed forces. They are people defending their homeland, be that in Khmelnytsk, in Ternopil, or Donetsk. All of them are defending their homeland. Yes, I have received such requests. We sought ways to assist the territorial defense, the 84th, 124th, 125th Brigade, and we've sought ways to support and help their supplies to them. I do have a question addressed to Oleksii. As a resident of Kyiv, who spent a lot of time in Lviv over the last 3 months, I was struck by such numbers that over 90% of the IDPs, one way or another, are saying that they have a comfortable stay in Lviv, and most are saying they're treated well. Over 50% of them are happy about this. How unexpected was it for yourselves, as the way the IDPs feel about the housing, about the locals, is always a risk factor. It's always something that creates friction. So how surprised were you to see the findings of your survey? You are posing a perfectly legitimate question, and being a social expert or a journalist or anyone thinking about the war and the IDPs, there are some questions that we fail to consider. A person who has relocated, she has to feel worse, find themselves in a worse condition. Just not the fact that you are not home cannot not have an impact. How can people feel comfortable if they're not home? But still, people give that estimate. And this came as a revelation, because when there's war, people reevaluate their questions that matter most, the factors that got under the people's skin, or vice versa, those that seemed important, have all been reconsidered, and many things have fallen by the wayside. In peacetime, people have relative safety, and can have a roof over their head and have access to food and all the essential services, feel that they are fine. So this made people reconsider a lot of things. I did suspect it as a social expert, but I couldn't say that this level of unity would be seen amongst the local and the IDPs. This came unexpectedly, because we all have our informational bubbles or fields. We all have our circles of communication. And now saying, when will people transition and start speaking Ukrainian? And this doesn't seem to be an issue. Yes, there are some people for whom language matters most, or some speak of inappropriate behavior, but they are by far not the majority. So the objective picture is quite different. And I am happy to say that we made such findings, and I owe it to Maksym for asking these questions in this study, because we didn't really know their priorities, but we know the IDPs are looking for a job. Many are determined to go back, and not everyone will be able to, and those that can't go back want to work, assimilate, stay on, and the locals don't mind it. We've seen this unity of the nation, and Ukraine has become a cohesive nation. No difference between east to west in any questions that we've been asking our people. Ukrainians stand united, a cohesive front, battling for victory, helping with funds as volunteers in the front line, and we all aspire to win this war. I have a question addressed to Maksym Kozytskyy. Uh, does this survey provide you the inputs for the future design of Lviv region, the way Lviv region is to develop after the war, and how will Lviv region after the war be different to the Lviv region between the 24th of February? It will be a different place. Some people would stay on for objective reasons, as many of them like it in here. Many won't have a home to go back to, and we have to make sure the children can be properly schooled. We have to make sure that people who choose to stay here could find a job. This is why we started the program to relocate the companies, remote studies for the IDPs, and together we can find understanding as the government uh, and the people have one common goal, and we want to make sure people can stay in Ukraine, work and study, and build our common future together. If there are no further questions, that is how we'll recap. Maksym Kozytskyy, Military Governor of Lviv, on Oleksii Antypovych, Director of the Sociology Group Rating.